We always say that privacy and security are interrelated, and we also know there is no privacy without security. And in that context, the Data Security Council of India has been playing an active role in guiding organizations, guiding the governmental institutions, and many others in terms of how to steer this journey of privacy and security, especially in a context of India, wherein it's complex, 1.4 billion people, lots of views, lots of variety in terms of thinking about privacy and security, and so on. So, in that context, I have the privilege and pleasure to meet and discuss all these issues with none other than Vinayak Godse, who's the CEO of Data Security Council of India. And also, we both worked in TCS long back. So let's go and talk to him and understand what does he think about privacy, what are the challenges in Indian landscape, what role is Data Security Council of India playing, and how is innovation contributing to privacy implementations.
Hello, and welcome to the Fit for Privacy podcast with Punit Bhatia. This is the podcast for those who care about their privacy. Here, your host, Punit Bhatia, has conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas, and opinions relating to privacy, data protection, and related matters. Be aware that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not legal advice. Let us get started.
So here we are with Vinayak Godse. Welcome Vinayak to Fit for Privacy podcast.
Thank you, Panat. It's a pleasure to be here on this podcast.
It's a pleasure to have you and thanks for your time from such a busy schedule because I see you on LinkedIn. It seems like you're the busiest person in India. Never mind. Uh, so let's start with a quick question. We talk about GDPR and we know GDPR has many aspects and it can be many meanings for many people. But when you think about GDPR, what's the one word that comes to your mind?
Yeah, so GDPR is in a way one approach to operationalize the expectation that you set up for privacy, right? In the case of Europe, privacy is such a fundamental right, and how do you operationalize that at a level where people can take it and implement it, and which leads to the protection of the fundamental right, and that's why GDPR as a regulation has so much of those nuanced level of expectation laid down in a way that people comply with them, and it also set up this enforcement mechanism in such a way that and also created these kind of liabilities and obligation to match to the higher level expectation set up as a privacy as a fundamental right. So that's something GDPR is for me.
I think that's very well said. And I would add or complexify it by saying when we have to implement GDPR, one you already mentioned is the aspect of legal, technical, and so on. But then you just cannot have a law and implement it. I think there goes beyond the law, some technological advancement, innovation,
Yeah.
thinking beyond the legal means and the technical means and the contractual means. So can you elaborate on that? Because I know you have a strong expertise and views on that aspect as well.
Yeah. See, the privacy we look at, right? When we say digitization happening, so digitization is happening primarily at three key things which is happening in digitization. Like we have been improving the experience from the consumer, we have been improving the productivity, and more importantly, we are trying to find new possibilities, right? And that is possible when every product and services is becoming more data layered. So data is becoming central to that, and while doing that, we have been un, in a way we are trying to do in a way that entire unbundling of the way the transactions are processing is happening, right? So a lot of third party, a lot of those solution providers, startups, they are coming and joining to help you the process transaction, right? And because of that, we are really exposed to a lot of those kind of external ecosystem apart from your own organization's ecosystem to do a particular transaction, right? So the business ecosystem is so complex, and the volume of a transaction that we are processing is so rising, and so is the velocity basically, right? and then millions different type of the data may be collected, and way it will be processed will be also very different and at various different kind of level of the organization. So if you try to solve the problem with only some effort for the compliance, for the processes, for the audit, you're not able to solve the expectation at a granular level, right? So that's what the role of technology comes into play. So the volume, complexity, accuracy requirement, the discipline that you want to bring, so that will be only possible only if you right to solve the problem more technical in way. And that's the key thing that we drive from the DSCI, that to help ecosystem to understand that these kind of challenges you can solve, uh, keeping technology central to the solution.
Yeah. And I think when we say keeping technology central to the solution, the India plays a key role in providing the software backbone
Yeah,
and software development. So there is an element of sometimes concern and sometimes apprehension,
yeah.
saying the Indian privacy landscape is still not, in some views, not so mature, and in some views, fragmented, or it's still developing. And all the views are correct. But how do you see this landscape currently? What is the situation right now?
Yeah, so one important question which got answered in 2017 is like where exactly as a country the privacy stand, right? So the ruling of the Supreme Court in 2017 talking about privacy is a fundamental right for all the Indian citizens and residents as well, right? So that got underlined. So there was certainly me. I had been involved into this adequacy assessment, and every time the assessment happened, there are a lot of evidences which takes that India do provides constitutional kind of support to the treating privacy at that level. But that underlying happening in 2017 is certainly one of the important critical steps that we achieved in the country in 2017. And after that, the process of setting up these comprehensive privacy laws started or kicked up in the country, right? But when we started, for a country which had 1.4 billion population, with digitization is one of the critical mean to improve the way the economy works, right? And that involves like inclusion, the reaching out to the farthest possible pace, the making it sure that the digitization of the we are bringing the people from the formal economy. So all of those goals require you to look at digital and mobile as one of the critical mean to achieve that goal in the country, right? So this digitization reality is also very important, right? One is that, and other is this basically. And last 5 years we have been trying to see how can we have this regime which balance between the expectation laid down by these kind of ruling in 2017 to the need of the society to really digitize the economy, digitize the different aspects of the life and transaction that we all have been doing.
That's very well put. And I think it also adds into the complexity of the environment, because complex, one, it's extremely digital, and the other, it's completely analog. And
Yeah,
same way, the understanding or awareness about privacy or the harm it can create is also very varying.
yeah,
So even if you can frame a law to educate and take along 1.4 billion people, that's the humongous challenge.
yeah.
So, and in this all this landscape, as the law would come eventually, I see that the Data Security Council of India is playing an active role. So how is it positioned? What's the role? Because is it security oriented? But I see you on LinkedIn, there are privacy elements also, there's cybersecurity also. So what's the role of DSCI?
So Data Security Council of India was set up by NASCOM, but when it was set up as a independent, not-for-profit company, right? And primary focus is on cybersecurity and privacy both, right? So this is probably the interesting experiment of setting up a think tank and industry body, both working together. So we work as a think tank as the industry body for cybersecurity and privacy, focus on cybersecurity and privacy, and set up as an independent company. So that really helps us to engage with the government closely. So all these machineries of government of India from the cyber security and policy making from digitization perspective and data privacy perspective, we work closely with the government of India. We had been part of these two committee government of India set up, one in 2012, this Justice APSA committee, and then 2018 the Sri Krishna committee. DSA was a formal part of that committee, which laid down the a kind of framework for data protection regulation in this country, right? So, and then we had been contributing to a lot of those policy engagements that government in India had been putting together around cybersecurity, but more importantly, last 5 6 years of time, mostly in data side, and we also engage on the all this bilateral, multilateral discussion happens with respect to data privacy, data flow, and then the relation of a trade and a data. So that is the area that we engaged through government of India and various set of discussion that we had been. So it's on one hand. On the other hand, then we engage with all the industry sectors. So our membership base is all across the industry vertical, like banking, telecom, oil energy, power sector, health sector. And all of them have been trying to now grappling with the challenges of the privacy, because all of them have putting together big, larger digitization strategy, and data is central to that. And they all have been lying to see. One is because of GDPR, and definitely GDPR is driving the policy initiatives all across the globe and also in India. Initially with GDPR, but now with these 2017 regulation, the Supreme Court ruling, and more importantly, the process which has been set up as setting up the privacy law in this country. So most of this member ecosystem is now looking at our support to really design and execute their privacy program. So we advise and guide our members for that. We created our own uh, credential program for privacy. So all the exposure that we have in policy making, international engagement, plus working with different sector, we try to capture that into DSCI's credential program, which is DSCI Certified Privacy Lead Assessor program and DSCI Certified Privacy Professional program. So we can take some little credit of creating privacy profession in the country. Thousands of people we train in privacy, and they have been doing their own work in their own companies to implement privacy, taking this, understanding it better, and we have created this privacy leadership ecosystem in the country.
And I also see that you are in active or promoting a certification. So are you getting into more of an IAPP or ISACA kind of model for India? Maybe
We are
I
not pure play certification body, right? IPP or ISACA is more pure play certification body.
right.
We see being working as a industry body in think tank for security, we get that exposure, right? On policy side, on international engagement happening around data, on our engagement with all these members that we have all across sector. So that also exposes it to quite a good, interesting way of the digitization happening in the country. We also engage with startup ecosystem. We also work with digital product ecosystem in the country. So that exposure and that learning, then we have translated into development of this credential of DSCI. So it's like a translating whatever we are learning to help build the profession in the country. So one part of us is that, not all. I talked about many other things that we do apart from the training.
Yeah, yeah.
We eventually are now trying to bring together some kind of a scheme or mechanism to help people to even evaluate um, their applications, their processes, their practices for privacy. So we are certainly looking at some kind of a assurance structure that we create for people to comply with, and maybe a seal program of DSCI, or maybe certification program DSCI. Until now, it was more creation of the profession, but eventually we'll be moving towards probably creating a something which could be used and leveraged by the, because the enforcement and compliance is also very nuanced, right? So you can't have one way of complying and enforcement, right? So we are trying to find different ways that we can provide to the our membership ecosystem, which they can leverage to show their commitment to the privacy implementation.
Makes sense. And you're when you say you're helping individuals, is it individual members or is it corporate driven
It's a
memberships?
corporate member I'm talking about. So,
Okay.
so these
So
are like
primarily for
our
corporates.
top 10 banks of India are now our member. So is the oil energy company. So is the health sector company. So the corporate membership I talk about.
Okay. And individuals can also become member of DSCI?
It's not a, we don't charge anything from member. We have chapters all across the country where they become
Okay.
member of chapter, but we don't really have a kind of uh, a kind of fee. I mean, individual membership fee that we charge for the people.
Mhm. And what are the challenges you are seeing in India in terms of privacy and security? As we talked earlier, the landscape is quite complex, the variety of awareness is complex or varying.
Yeah, so one is the aggressive digitization that we see, right? And some of this digitization is being done in terms of bringing together a lot of those experimentation from the government side, right? So I'm not saying that is a challenge, but we probably are showing to the world that digitization can happen in a different way and it can be very scalable. So the experimentation that we did in terms of Aadhaar and then UPI and entire digital public infrastructure that we put in together, which is democratizing the way digitization happened, right? And that also means the kind of payment that we are processing per month is almost going to now $10 billion transaction that we have been doing. No country is coming close to it. So when we are creating our own digitization strategy, which could be an example to the other global geographies to follow. So one level up thing is ki how can we more make that more robust, and that's what the policymakers are looking at. Ki how can we make that more robust from the policy perspective and also from the, because this is architectural intervention, right? And government laid architectural interventions, right, with institutional governance mechanisms. So how can you make the design and processes more robust? So that's the one level that is there, and then every sector is digitizing, every sector is putting together plan for making use of data or collecting data, improving their productivity, creating new possibilities for them through that. So then sectoral nuances also sometimes throw challenge to you, and we have taken sectoral privacy project, and that is trying to reveal those kind of challenges and trying to find solutions for that, which could be very good guiding factor for our members. Then the digital product industry is also growing quite well in India, and in a way B2C in creating those digital product ecosystem and probably having those unicorns. India is third largest startup ecosystem in the world, and that is largely based on the digitization, right? And digital as a mean to, so there are a lot of digital first organization in the country, and where they have been collecting, processing information all across the areas and ideas they're working on. So that is another area to look at. And then a lot of those products and elements that has been used, right? And largely some of those products are getting consumed. So we software side, we are definitely good, but a lot of those products now coming in IoT side, in a digital thing side basically. So those consumption which are happening, and that could lead to some of the challenges that we see now across global in India as well. But here the volume is significant. The transaction volume is also quite significant. Number of people significant. A lot of diversity all across the country. The language is another challenge. The you may define one structure and one way of implementing privacy, but then it has to deal with the diversity, right? It has to deal with the enforcement kind of challenges and all across the country. So these challenges are very important and very unique challenges for India to have its own digital protection or data protection regime, and also find its own way of making it sure that you have the content principle and also you have the enforcement mechanism which could match to these challenges.
Indeed. And I think as the digitization happens at the pace and the scale at which happening, it's important to figure in security and privacy by design. And that's where DSCI and you are playing an active role in helping those organizations. And how are these challenges that you mentioned being solved, especially because India has a lot of innovation and creativity, and there are a lot of ideas, lots of opportunities. What do you see happening in that space? Because when the law comes, that will be needed.
So it's not one law, right? It's like a kind of a framework that we had been uh, putting together, right? So there is a data protection, digital data protection bill which is in place, right? And there's a constitutional guarantee that I just talked about. Then there's a Digital India Act which is also coming in. There is a telecom bill which is coming in. So it's all will work together to create a kind of a regime, policy regime for data-led economy in the country, right? Another thing is, while this is being played, a care is certainly being taken that this is not really stifling the innovation and digitization possibility. So that's the second care we have been taking, and we are seeing some of the challenges that GDPR has thrown in terms of uh, uh, challenges and some frustration associated with the GDPR. It's really inhibiting people to innovate, do more digitization, and that learning is definitely kicked in terms of the way we had been thinking about our field. Third part is in a way at a national and government level, I think the story that we have been creating in terms of our own story through digital public infrastructure. So a lot of deliberations are also happening if you're taking it to the global market. So how can we make more robust in nature? People and citizens basically getting connected, and because we got this entire reduction regime from high value to low value high value, everybody seems now doing transaction largely on a digital way. So then sometimes that led to possibilities of fraud, right? So the fraud is certainly one of the, in terms of percentage, we may not be that significant, but because volume is so big, so absolute number looks very very significant, right? And that may give you impression that somehow the frauds are quite significant, and how do you really create a ecosystem or design of the solution so that it doesn't leave scope for the fraud, and even if there is a fraud happening, there's a very effective, efficient support system available for victim. So those are the areas basically. So the lot of thinking is going on in this country as of now.
That's good to know because fraud inevitably will happen.
Yeah.
You can do your best, but you cannot say it will not happen. And when it happens, the redressal mechanisms for individuals are what we look into, and also guiding the organizations to mitigate any loopholes that are there or reduce the number of loopholes. So, is the Data Security Council also playing that part in terms of creating those redressal mechanisms or working
So
with the government?
we had been, so we closely work with law enforcement agencies. We have one center called as a CCITR. It's a Center for Cybercrime Investigation Training and Research Center, which is like in police premises. We set up this with help of the industry, and we have been training law enforcement officials to understand this cyber crime fraud ecosystem well, and training them in digital forensic crime investigation, presenting those cases in court well. Building the law enforcement's capability in this area is certainly one important thing that we do. At national level, we contribute to a lot of those thinking which is happening in terms of how do you address these strategically at national level through policy intervention, plus some of the system thinking which is happening at national level. There's a G20 conference which is happening next month, only focused on the crime and cyber security, which Minister of Home Affairs has been hosting. That we are one of the knowledge partners there. We also work with our own member ecosystem in financial sector, right? So we seek their help to spread more awareness. We help them in the strategy they're laying down to for cybersecurity and the fraud management as well. And we also nurture the industry in this area, like fraud management industry, the digital forensic industry, the consulting services industry in this area. So these are multifaceted effort that we put together to contribute in this area.
Very nice. And if, I mean, in a sense of time and also to kind of get towards a close, if there is an organization who's been unsure on security and privacy and wants to do something, what would be your one advice to them?
Yeah, so we ask them to start with creating good visibility about the data that you have been collecting, generating, um, receiving or sharing, right? And that's the critical first step, right? To get, so visibility is the key first step that you achieve with respect to data protection. So that's the key critical message that we start. Then once do you have that, then you yourself will think about, can I with this data, these concerns will come to me, and with this concern, I need to have some kind of a process, some kind of organization that needs to be set, policy needs to be set up. Basically, I need to probably understand what it brings to me in terms of regulation, my obligations and liability. You start looking at that. Then this data that you do, the processing that you do, you share with the external ecosystem. Then you start thinking about key, I'm owning privacy, so and I'm also sharing the data. So how can I share the responsibility with my ecosystem that work with me? So then you start looking at how can you share with to contract or any other mean. You then start monitoring it, because you know that a small incident create a larger problem for privacy, and you know that every breach would could create the liability could be very specific to individual breach. So then you start monitoring the entire system for the privacy specific breach. Then you create a specific technology structure and processes for securing the personal data. So you create the sensitization about the personal data, try to bring process like a privacy impact assessment in the organization. So the initial first step is to create the visibility. So that's where you start, and that's the key advice that we try to get it to try to give it to our member ecosystem. Once you yourself create visibility, you'll start taking all of the steps which I just mentioned about.
I think very fair that if you have to do, and that's what even in GDPR we say that if you have to do, have a record of processing activity
Yeah. Yeah.
or the data inventory, and then build data maps and data flows, and then start seeing where the vulnerabilities are and start addressing one by one. But before we close, just one final question, because a lot of people would get confused or are still getting confused around two or three terms we use: security and privacy. So, well, these are interchangeable, but how do you see the security, privacy, or the data protection angle?
See, privacy, the questioning is different than a security, right? Security is largely do it you are doing for you and your assets and your um, infrastructure, and you try to protect that, right? But privacy you have to do some for somebody else, right? And it's mostly the citizens and residents of the country, and they have been assured about the right, and that's why there's obligation liability sitting on you, right? And that's why questioning that you have for the privacy is different. So for example, security, you will at the most will go need to know basis access to the information, right? Privacy will put a question ki why you need that information, why that much information. So this questioning wouldn't come in security. This questioning which largely stem from the minimization, purpose limitation, such kind of expectation privacy. Those expectations are different expectation than a security expectation. So that's the first distinction, right? And then and that's why it is different than a security. But then when you need to find a relation between the security and privacy, so these expectations are now articulated largely in a content principle of privacy, and security is certainly one of the so many other principles of the privacy, right? So one way is look at key security is one principle out of a lot of other content principle that we talk about. Second is security also mean to deliver privacy. Some of the security control, security technology, security architecture can help you to manage the expectations of privacy much better, basically. So this is a relation and also distinction that we try to see from our perspective.
Very well said. I've asked this question and even answered this question many times, but the profoundness and the simplicity with which you brought in the aspect, the one is from the perspective of the individual, and other is from the perspective of the organization, and the interest is very different. Privacy is purely in the interest of the individual. So
Yeah.
that's very well said, and I think that's a very good moment to say it's been a very useful and very enlightening conversation. I'm sure everyone will enjoy it, and I would say thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Puneet, for having me here in this platform.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, feel free to share it with a friend and write a review. If you have already done so, thank you so much. And if you did not like the show, don't bother and forget about it. Take care and stay safe. Fit for Privacy helps you to create a culture of privacy and manage risks by creating, defining, and implementing a privacy strategy that includes delivering scenario-based training for your staff. We also help those who are looking to get certified in CIPPE, CIPM, and CIPT through on-demand courses that help you prepare and practice for certification exam. Want to know more? Visit www.fit4privacy.com. That's www.fit4privacy.com. FIT, the number 4, privacy.com. If you have questions or suggestions, drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. Until next time, goodbye.